Thanks, Mike. Well, as lead negotiators from Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. prepare for the fifth round of NAFTA 2.0 talks, just this week, negotiators announcing they are extending the talks by 2 days. That gives leaders more time to hash out a new deal. Well, the U.S. dairy industry is taking a hard stance, trying to break through current barriers when exporting milk to Canada. But in this Farm Journal report, 3 leaders, including former Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, say walking away from a deal is not an option. Dairy farmers like Dean Strauss are getting good at producing milk.
Technology is at the forefront of agriculture. We just have to learn how to accept it and how to put it into the farm.
As farmers are grasping onto the latest technology, it's adding efficiency to an already growing milk supply. USDA's latest milk production report shows production per cow in September hit 1,851 pounds. That's the highest production per cow ever recorded. The growing supply is creating a glut of dairy, with leaders searching for a new home for all that milk.
Since 2003, nearly 50% of all the new milk that's been produced by our producers has had to go into the export market. And without that, we would have had a serious problem in dairy. So I think it's fair to say, while we are going to focus on domestic consumption and we're going to do our very level best, I think it's also fair to say that the chances are very good that we won't be able, just with domestic consumption alone, to be able to deal with the increased production.
While the dairy industry wants better market access to Canada, Mexico is the #1 customer of U.S. dairy, a market they not only want to preserve, but grow.
Mexico is our most important market. It's over $1 billion a year in sales. And if we didn't have access to that market, or we had to pay the higher duties that used to be charged pre-NAFTA, we wouldn't have the exports we have there. It'd be a serious harm to the U.S. dairy industry if we didn't have NAFTA and the access it provides us to Mexico.
Dairy may be a contentious issue within NAFTA, but dairy leaders say one thing is clear: failure to renegotiate NAFTA is not an option.
I don't think that's a result that U.S. agriculture is going to accept. And at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of other industries that feel very similar to this. I think the responsibility for the administration is to figure out creatively how to get the job done. They were right to raise the issue of modernizing and renegotiating NAFTA, but now they have to bring it home.
I think there's just too much here to walk away from. I think the administration knows that, but I'm optimistic we can get there, and I know the administration is getting the message. I know Capitol Hill is getting the message. And I'm optimistic we'll get something done here.
But as the current administration reworks current trade deals, Dykes says agriculture is missing out on opportunities to build new markets.
But as we look at the future and we look at the milk coming at us, and we look at the importance of export markets, we need to be looking at proactive free trade agreements with countries around the world, especially Asia Pacific. And presidents in Japan this week, Vietnam this week. There are places we need to be negotiating free trade agreements today.
Because if we're not, the EU is. Right. And one of the things we haven't discussed is the whole issue of geographic indications and the concern that we now have both in Mexico and Japan on this issue. It's another issue, is another reason why NAFTA has to get resolved very quickly, because it will also have an impact on the GI issue.
From trade to a farm bill, dairy leaders are also fighting for a better safety net for farmers.
The current program, the Margin Protection Program, as you know, is not working. It's not working as intended. It is the right outline of a program, but cuts that were made in the policy as it's working its way through the 2014 Farm Bill process really ended up rendering it ineffective.
When you look at the Margin Protection Program that was passed in the 2014 Farm Bill, it hasn't paid very often. Producers will say it's a safety net that doesn't provide much help. And when you look at how they're signing up for that program today, they're signing up at very low levels, which means just not a very good safety net. So how do we reduce premiums or other ways to increase the likelihood of payments in low milk price periods?
But it's a battle that could end up coming down to cost.
Candidly, I said this when I was secretary, and I'll say it now that I'm not. We ought to talk about it in terms of not just a farm bill, it's a jobs bill, it's a research bill, it's an innovation bill, it's a conservation bill, it's a trade bill. And I think if we start talking about it in its totality, I think people will understand the necessity of finding creative solutions.
It's uncertainty about changes to policy and trade that weighs on an already pressured dairy market.
That's really what agriculture is about. Sometimes you have to live another day, and you be smart about it, be strategic, and then move forward.
And as producers remain hopeful, it's a grim outlook on prices that's creating a dire situation today.
which could end up being a foundation to get policy ultimately pushed through Washington.
Now, Vilsack also talked about using food as a convener in conversations about trade in the Farm Bill. He says if you can bring such a big issue all the way to the level of the consumer, he thinks it'll highlight the need even more. Well, when we come back, John Phipps.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines,